Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 10th of August 2023. Just to remind people, I'm on holiday, that's why there aren't all the bells and whistles on this video. Well, there are never bells or whistles on my videos, but you can't see my ugly mug and all sorts. Well, you can actually. Hello, here I am. I'm on holiday. I don't mean to rub that in. I know lots of people are unable to go on holiday and whatnot. Nonetheless, I am in a hotel room, not down the beach at the moment, at the annoyance of, or to the annoyance of my family, no doubt, or maybe to give them some peace. Uh, anyway, that's enough blathering on. Let's get to the usual place that we start, the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, or the usual caveats apply, of course. 580 KIA, fairly average. That's actually a downtick from yesterday, but generally average from what we've seen over the last few weeks, 2-3 weeks. 16 tanks, 13 APVs. So fairly heavy stats on those two categories. And I think that probably reflects some heavy activity right up and down the lines, from the very northeast now down to Kherson area, where there's a bit of an uptick in offensive activities for the Ukrainians. Yesterday, we saw a larger number of liquidated personnel, KIA, for the Russians, and that could go in line with what we're seeing. I mean, 580 is no small feat for the Ukrainians, but also 16 tanks and 13 APVs. Yeah, I think things are fairly heavy. 15 artillery systems, which is slightly low compared to what we have seen, but we have seen up to 40 lost in a day. So 15 is still a significant number, even if it is fewer than we have seen over the last week or so. 15 pieces of artillery taken out is going to hurt the Russians. One helicopter, again, there was another helicopter lost yesterday by the Russians. Don't know what type of helicopter that is yet. Actually, I've not heard that announced, but that is significant. For tactical drones, unless it was another KA-52, can't quite remember. I think it was unannounced. 4 drones. That's not last night. That's the night before. 16 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 4 pieces of special equipment. So that's probably things like electronic warfare, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. That can be like literally video cameras set up and whatnot. In fact, if we go to Andrew Perpetua, who is giving us an updated, or it's kind of anecdotal, but it's what he finds when he's surveilling, the videos that are coming out and images that are coming out on social media with regard to losses for each side. And as you can see, it's fairly equal as to what he found yesterday. That might indicate that the Ukrainians are going on the offensive quite a bit in a few areas. You've got Robotina area, which is, as he said in a live stream recently, it's exactly what I keep saying. It's kind of a bizarre place for the Ukrainians to attack there, because it's where they've got the most heavily defended trench works and whatnot, the Russians. And so you're thinking, why keep banging your head against that one? And they have lost a lot of equipment and made only marginal gains in Robotna area. So yeah, there you go. Anyway, as we can see here, there's quite a wide range of stuff that the Russians have lost. But up here, the recovery vehicle, the radar, and the surveillance or comms, would all of those three, so that'd be the Brem that we saw yesterday on fire. So those three would fit into this special equipment category at the bottom there. But yeah, quite a wide range of stuff for both sides. The Ukrainians have lost a lot of APCs, IFVs, and MRAPs. So actually, if you count all them up, that's 5, 9, 12. So for the Ukrainians, just if they were all lost yesterday, that would indicate that the Ukrainians lost 12 APVs yesterday. So when we see these figures as Russian losses, don't forget that there are days where the Ukrainians are losing significant pieces of equipment themselves. That's not always the case. It's generally at the moment, and from most sources, apart from the Russian MOD, most sources would concur that the Ukrainians are losing fewer pieces of kit than the Russians, and we have seen that from Andrew Perpetua, who's not biased and looks at all the sources. And he even said yesterday, he's almost trying to seek out Russian sources so that he's not giving a biased representation of what's going on. And so he has an accurate idea himself, right? So This is a slightly unusual day where we are seeing the Ukrainians losing and as many pieces of kit as the Russians. Right, moving on, but actually staying well within the same area that we're talking about. This is a fascinating post, right? Dimitri from War Translators says he's translated a Telegram post from Russian officer Colonel Shuvalov described describing on Telegram how it's encouraged to fabricate reports about destroyed Ukrainian equipment by filming strikes on different days using various weapons and equipment. This is done to please the upper leadership since everyone benefits from positive reports and inflated numbers. It's a long post, but worth reading. I'm not going to read all of it, but I am going to dip into it at the end here, or kind of halfway through. So, where was it? Right, further down here. And the military will solve it how they in the way that they know how, in a military way. I won't list specific examples, but everyone in the army knows perfectly well what I am talking about. This is not exotic. This already this is already a mass practice. Well, what's he talking about? We're not only hitting wooden models. Now I'll say a vile and unpopular thing, but at least one active officer points out that if I'm lying before and after the appearance of Western military equipment in general, a very popular way to give a good result upwards is to beautifully fire at the enemy's already destroyed equipment. Bradley, that was ATGM'd yesterday, so it was hit with an anti-tank guided missile yesterday. Today, it can be beautifully fired at from helicopters, and tomorrow you can hit it from self-propelled guns with video recording reports and all the right angles. In other words, when we have seen Ka-52 attack helicopters hitting Ukrainian stuff, and the quality of the footage. This has been commented on by a lot of people from the attack helicopters is really, really poor. By the way, it's very grainy. It could well be that they are firing at stuff that's already been blown up by something else, and they're doing it on a different day, and then reporting this to upwards to command. And tomorrow you can hit it from self-propelled guns with video recording reports and all the right angles. So this becomes not one, but three wrecked Bradleys. Since the political leadership is demanding a specific report, the general staff will demand such a report too. And he says, this is already a mass practice. Exotic is to make an order for a service of designing pictures, a video of an objective control of the battle. Quite sure about the translation there. You give an acquaintance a video and a photo of a wrecked NTLB, and you give him a task, and he returns high quality pictures to you, where instead of an NTLB, there is a tank or self propelled guns, next to which are several wrecked infantry fighting vehicles. In other words, there's fabrication of pictures and video here to show things that are lost other than just an NTLB. But in the army itself, no one will ever try and fight this, and it is stupid to scold the general staff or the ministers. Some external solution is needed, something similar to how the targets of the Ukrainians are controlled by Western instructors. Because for the military, everything that I mentioned above is, as it were, not a crime. And not even a zaliot, which is like a blunder. Zaliot is when you were caught doing this, but caught in such a way that you could not get yourself out. Passing out the John Deere harvesters as leopards was, of course, an oversight, but even then they got away. So referring to the time when, and I showed you this, the Russians were claiming that they hit some leopard tanks and they were like combine harvesters or John Deere tractors. And, there was ridicule from pro Ukrainian sources about that. But this guy says, it was found out, but the Russians got it, the people who were responsible for it got away with it. Although they should be punished 3 times, primarily those who were stupid enough to create this setup and get caught. And the rest, the political leadership has its own universe from which it gives orders and instructions to the military leadership. The military leadership already has its own universe, very different. And it gives instructions down and reports up based on its vision of the situation. At the bottom, there's generally a harsh reality, but it's adjusted for military perception. The necessary reports are required from you in the universe of military leadership. And if reality does not correspond to it, these are problems of reality. You're an officer, you can do it. Wow. This, honestly, I keep saying stuff like this. This is one of the most important accounts of what's going on that I think I've read in months. This is, and assuming it's genuine, right? this is an example of Vranyo admitted by the Russian officer here. So Vranyo, for those who don't know, go and look at Perrin's video on this. Very good. Talks about how you give a report to your boss in the military, and you know what's in your report is BS, and your boss knows that what's in the report is BS, and you know that your boss knows, and your boss knows that you know that he knows it's BS. This is just a merry dance. Everyone knows it's a load of BS, but you give the report in because it's expected and it's what they want. This is like what he's talking about here. It's what they want, so you create it. You're an officer, you can do it. If it doesn't correspond to reality, you go and make it correspond to reality, which isn't to say uh, go and blow up the requisite things to match the imagery. It's like, we are just creating reality out of perception. In other words, it's not reality, it's just fake. And everyone knows this is BS. You present a report, and that goes up the chain of command. That keeps happening until you get to the top, where someone like Putin doesn't really actually then know it's BS. There's some kind of like disconnect somewhere up that hierarchy of command, so that actually they're getting garbage information in. Garbage in is garbage out. So in that function machine, they end up making really poor decisions based on really bad information, and it starts here. And what he says here is absolutely spot on, that right at the bottom of that chain, so at the bottom, there is generally a harsh reality. It's just at the bottom, yeah, we're getting hammered, we're dying, we're losing stuff. But as those reports go up the chain of command, suddenly you're winning. The Ukrainians have lost 300 Leopard tanks and 1,000 helicopters or whatever, and a couple of spaceships. And it's just an absolute nonsense. This is supremely important. I might read all of it to you if I get a chance to do an extra. But yeah, very very illuminating. Now, in the back, and the thing is, I don't think the Ukrainians do this. I don't think they. Well, I think there probably are overblown statistics here, right? But I don't think they're done from a purely overt propaganda lying way. I think they're more likely to be done by guesstimations, repeated guesstimations. So things like the number of KIA, sorry, is going to be overblown, because when you're hitting a dugout, you don't know how many people are in there. When you're hitting a command post or a barracks, you don't know how many people are in there. When you're hitting an MTLB or an APC, you don't know how many people are in there. So you kind of guess, you have averages or whatever, but it means that there's a really strong chance that these will be somewhat overinflated, the personnel numbers, compared to other numbers like artillery systems, that actually you have drone footage of an artillery system getting blown up, and you know that that thing's been blown up, right? So it's much more verifiable. So I think the accuracy for some of these are more correct. There was talk at the beginning of the conflict that some of the aircraft numbers were overinflated, and that may be the case, but I don't think there's this systematic approach to accumulating the statistics that involves outright fabrication in the way that the Russians do it. Anyway, in the Bakhmut direction, 140 Russian invaders were destroyed, 232 were wounded, 4 were taken prisoner. Ukrainian soldiers continued to hold the initiative. This was announced by Deputy Commander of the Eastern Group of Forces of Strategic Communications, Cherevati. We don't want to disclose the details, but the initiative is being held by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. The enemy is suffering heavy losses. There continues to be powerful pressure on the enemy, but very thoughtful, systemic, without frontal attacks that would lead to heavy losses of personnel, he said in a statement. Now, this is kind of the same subject, isn't it? Can we trust that 140 Russian invaders were killed and 232 were wounded? How do they get those very precise numbers? Well, apparently there are protocols for the Ukrainians. They have to provide footage to their bosses, who then, that it needs to be confirmed in a number of different ways, blah 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 blah. So there is a way that they do it to try and get an accurate understanding of what's going on the front line. Ukraine, pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin voices will attack these figures as being just the same kind of uh, you know mechanisms involved as with this kind of lying from the Russians. But from what I understand, that is not the case. But of course, there'll always be these arguments going on. And just to let you know that when I said the other day, Skabiva, this Russian propagandist, her that she was announcing 284,000 obituaries on social media, and there was all this talk about this being Russian. Some people have wrote in the comments, and I did mean to say this straight away afterwards, but it's just it's, difficult remembering all this. And actually, you don't see this on many of the sources, but the claim was that actually she was referring to Ukrainian KIA and not Russian. But and that the video wasn't, it was cut in such a way. I've not seen any of those claims elsewhere that would suggest that, as in I haven't seen the full video that shows it that she was talking about the Russians, but she might well have done. Uh, I don't know. I leave that one open. It may well be that she was sorry that she was talking about Ukrainians. It may well be that that was the case, rather than admitting the Russians had taken 284,000 casualties or losses, indeed, KIA. Um, Right. Anyway, moving on. That's a kind of a potential corrective. National Resistance Center is reporting that the wounded Russian soldiers are overwhelming health clinics in occupied territories. Medical clinics in Russian-occupied southern Ukraine are overwhelmed with wounded military personnel, providing no services to civilian residents either. And this kind of goes back to these heavy losses. Uh, it's trying to build up a picture with all the pieces of information to see whether what the Ukrainian general staff are claiming is at least somewhat correct. And when you hear that their hospitals are fully overwhelmed, and we've heard this a number of times, then you can imagine that is the case for sure. Um, uh, if you remember, just recently, the large landing ship that Olengorsky Gornyak that was hit by a maritime drone, and that's now in a dry dock. Well, it will be problematic for Russia to repair its landing vessel, which was reportedly hit by a surface drone on August 4th in the near future. The Defense Ministry's main Directorate of Intelligence spokesperson Andriy Yusov said. So this is that's coming from the Ukrainian military intelligence, but I would imagine they're not going to find it particularly easy to repair that in the dry dock at Sevastopol at all. So I think that's a really successful hit. And that actually, was it Darren in the thread yesterday saying this would be perfect to hit with a Storm Shadow, and I say no. I mean, this is disabled. There's no point wasting a Storm Shadow on this ship in the dry dock when there are ships moored out there unmoving. I would hit those ships with a Storm Shadow if you're going to hit any at all. This one is now out of action, possibly terminally. Given especially that they aren't going to be able to move it easily or fix it easily in place at Sevastopol, given that it's Sevastopol as a war zone. So, Liberty of Russia Legion, unidentified patriots denazified Putin's traveling circus in the Arkhangelsk region. The regime's troops are trained on this training area before being sent to the hotspots in the Ukrainian front line. This is also where the newly mobilized get to. Conscientious Russians liquidated 3 soldiers' tents during daylight right under the regime's nose. We are becoming more numerous. We're getting stronger. We are getting closer and closer to the ones responsible for this war. So this is some fantastic music, obviously. Yeah, one for the fans of my music anger. That was all right. Here we can see obviously pretty shaky footage, but a bit of sabotage going on in the training camp. All of this kind of activity helps, because it's not so much the damage it does, but it's the realization that, do you know what? Not everyone's really happy with what we're doing, and then it sows these seeds of discontent that can spread like a virus amongst the mobilized trainees there. And then all of a sudden you realize you've got a mutiny on your hands, type thing. Right. At another base, a Russian military base in Stavropol Krai. This is over in, I think, Western Russia, not too far from the border with Ukraine, we have a Russian military base on fire, or something to do with a military base. It's various accounts of exactly what this is, but and I don't know how this started, what happened, whether it's sabotage, whether it's someone smoking around a corner, or whether it's been hit by a drone or by a missile or whatever. But this was on fire yesterday, and that's pretty significant, and it's exactly the sort of thing you want to be seeing. And indeed, here, a warehouse in the town of Georgievsk in the Stavropol Krai region of Western Russia is reportedly used by the support unit of Russian armed forces. It's currently on fire. Emergency services on site. As you can see in that video, there are a number of support vehicles there. So that is some lovely music. That is uh, yeah, evidently, indeed, a place where the support unit is housed. This morning, Ukrainian forces destroyed the command post of the Russian army in Novokakhovka. Uh, I haven't put this down as a long-range strike or anything, but generally, stuff like this happening in Novokakhovka and similar areas is done by artillery, precision artillery, rather than distant striking using Storm Shadow or HIMARS or anything like that. It could well be HIMARS, I don't know. But if it's in Novokakhovka, it's right. It's well within artillery range, so that's useful. Explosion near the Domodedovo airport near Moscow was widely explained as a fire at a car service, but I think there were also a couple of drones sent. I don't know because it's confusing. Sometimes, like 2 nights ago, 2 drones were shot down. Ukrainian drones were shot down in around Moscow, and then you see another drones around Moscow, and you're not sure whether that's someone reporting what happened the night before, whether that happened again, and then this came out shortly after those claims. So I don't know whether this was anything to do with drone activity or not. But anyway, the airport or somewhere near the airport being hit is obviously useful for the Ukrainians. And on the other side of the coin, this is not unusual at all, but just to remind you that the Russians are repeatedly shelling places, particularly along the Dnipro River, places like Minets and Nikopol, just north of the Zaporizhia Reservoir, and then around Kupiansk. In fact, so much so here there are strikes with FAB 250, the guided aerial bombs from aviation. But the Kupiansk area, right in the northeast, there have been calls to evacuate a load more towns in that area by the Ukrainian administration because one would assume the Russians are putting some effort into offensive maneuvers in that area and are getting closer to, arguably getting closer to Kupiansk. So that is why they've possibly called for those evacuations. But anyway, places like that getting hit, and as ever, just residential blocks. 41-year-old civilian man, 39-year-old woman, blah blah blah. I don't mean blah blah blah, but it is. I, you can argue the pro-Kremlin Russian voice will argue that, hey, that's what the administration are always going to say. They're not going to say that there's 15 soldiers barracked in that building that have died. Yes, there is that, but when you look at the buildings and you look at the outcome of these strikes, they are just invariably civilian targets that are here, and the Russians are doing quite a lot of double tapping as well. So the emergency services come and help out, and then 40 minutes later, in the middle of helping out, they're struck again in the same place, and it just goes to show that those Russian attacks, the decision making is just clearly criminal war crimes. Right, talking about long distance strikes overnight, Russia attacked Ukraine with Shahed drones. So last night, 7 out of 10 of them were shot down. So there will be 3 drones that got through. Unfortunately, an oil depot was hit in the Rivne region, and this is reported by. He's standing in front of it, and it does look like a fake. I'm not showing you the video here, but the video does look really fake. It looks like he just whacked this in behind, and why would you have an oil depot right in the middle of a field? But it's not. It's almost certainly not fake, but it's just weird. Anyway, he's standing in front of a burning oil depot, saying pretty much at 45. What was the claim? I can't remember now, but there's a lot of emergency services on the scene trying to sort it out. Russian forces hit Rivne Oblast with a massive drone attack on August 10th. It destroyed an oil depot in the Dubno district, says the Oblast governor Vitaly Koval. That is a bit of a problem, hitting targets like that is obviously going to hurt the Ukrainian logistics. The Ukrainians do that often enough to the Russians. It is going to hurt. Now, I did a breaking news video on this, so I won't dwell on it too much. There was a massive explosion northeastern Moscow. I mean, a big old explosion that the Russians are saying was a pyrotechnics warehouse. Never was that. And then they said, no, it's a pipes warehouse. And then they said this, and then they said, it's clearly some kind of either munitions, or there's an argument that it's an optical factory that helps make stuff for tanks, etc., etc. It is basically a big explosion, and that you can bet your bottom dollar that there's something big and combustible in there. The Russians were saying nothing combustible was involved in this explosion. And he's like, literally, it's a massive combustion explosion. Anyway, whatever. There've about 50 victims claimed. I don't know if they are what type of casualties they are. For some reason, ammunition is found throughout the territory, so they started finding shells all around there. So the argument was that they were making shells for the Russian army. Lots of claims coming out about the site. As you can see, huge devastation there. You would assume was a big explosion, as in, there's not like a lot of little explosions. There's one big old explosion going on there. Russia, having only one artillery plant for ammo, says David D, decided to open another where they made 80 to 90% of its sites for tanks and MBGs. Something went wrong, and now they have lost both facilities. Good job, Russia. So this is the claim that actually they were making artillery and sites there, and it all went up in smoke, and that is a massive loss, and that could well be exactly what's happened. Just don't know, but that was and whether how it happened, no idea, but that was a huge event yesterday, and is potentially really significant logistically speaking for the Russian army, if some of the rumors are true. Right, this is with regard to the strikes on the Ukrainian airbase in the Khmelnytsky region that supposedly is home to the Su-24 bombers that dropped the Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles. Ukrainian Air Force rebases Su-24 bombers, which are carriers of the long-range Storm Shadow and Scalp, e.g. Cruise missiles, every 24 hours to protect them from Russian missile attacks, according to the Bild, the German media organization. The publication writes that in Ukraine, the entire network of Soviet-era airfields was restored and new ones were equipped. Secret runways on highways are also used. Operational airfields are protected by Iris-T and Patriot. The storage sites of the above-mentioned missiles are also under protection. So I said this before, I would be incredibly surprised if, with the Russians attacking that airbase, and they've attacked that airbase a number of times, trying to get through defenses by using Kinzhal hypersonic missiles and so on and so forth. And I think they have got through and hit the base in a number of places. But although the Ukrainians claim that they didn't do any significant damage at all, and in fact, satellite imagery suggests that is the case. But even if the Russians did fundamentally, take out this airport, I don't think they would take out anything fundamental like these airframes and storage of the cruise missiles, because the Ukrainians aren't stupid. They know that wherever these are stored, they are going to have mitigation plans in place. So the storage of the missiles is going to have to be in places where you can't you can't blow up those missiles with attacks like this, and moving the airframes around. And as soon as the air raid sirens go up, because those missiles have been targeted coming over Ukrainian airspace, you get those Su-24s up in the air and to another base or whatever. So this doesn't surprise me at all. It's kind of pretty obvious, isn't it? But it also points to the conclusion that Russia probably haven't done any damage to the airframes or the storage of all those missiles uh, in all their attacks with their very expensive missiles. Zaporizhia was attacked yesterday. Another attack by Russian, as this source says, Russian terrorists. As of now, 3 people have been reported dead. My condolences to the families. The rescue operation is underway. All victims will be provided with the necessary assistance, and the war crime of Russia will certainly face its sentence. The response to Russian terrorists will be on the front line, thanks to our heroic warriors. So quite a bit of rhetoric there, but yeah, well founded, because Zaporizhia was again hit in terms of um, civilian infrastructure. It's just not cool. It looks like a church that's hit there in Zaporizhia. So yeah, lots of people pretty angry with that. Zaporizhia missile attack. Russia once again demilitarized residential areas, supermarkets, and local businesses. Yeah, so that is. Part of me thinks, well, they're not going to be sending missiles to those places on purpose. And then I think, well, why are those missiles hitting? And I mean, if I'm being the most charitable to Russia, it's that they are trying to target Ukrainian military targets, but they have just very ineffective missiles that have a circle error probable. That means that they're just as likely, possibly even more likely, to hit residential areas than the thing they're intending to hit. The worst case scenario, they are intending to hit these residential areas and cultural points to try and break the spirit of the Ukrainians. Uh, no, but you should know that that's not going to work. It will just harden the spirit more. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. 11 drones were intercepted over Sevastopol, Russia claims. And often when they claim this, you can be pretty sure some got through. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that air defense units, although having said that, Sevastopol, I think, probably has the best Russian air defense of anywhere in the occupied territories. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that the air defense units destroyed 11 drones traveling toward the city of Sevastopol in Russian occupied Crimea. So it could well be that all of them were destroyed. 11 out of 2 intercepted. Uh, but yeah, it wouldn't. It is pretty plausible that all of them were destroyed over Sevastopol. But what the Ukrainians tried to do is either overwhelm the air defenses or find out where they are. They've been quite sneaky around Crimea with their use of drones, the Ukrainians, and they use a lot of different types of drones. Anyway, that's the strikes segment of the first news video. Let's move on to the last bit, the other bits and pieces. Thomas Tyner here talks about how he knows of 111 known Ukrainian combat brigades. I mean, wow. In the army, 34 mechanized, 5 tank, 5 motorized, 4 rifle, 2 Jaeger, they're kind of light infantry rangers, 2 mountain, 2 assault, 1 special purpose, 1 presidential. Air assault forces, 4 air assault, 3 air mobile, 1 airborne, 1 Jaeger. And then 4 Marine Corps, 1 Rifle Air Force, 31 Territorial Defense, 7 National Guards, 1 National Police Offensive Guard, 1 Border Guard Offensive Guard, 1 General Staff Guards, and there might be more. As for the support brigades and regiments, 3 Special Forces regiments, 16 artillery brigades, 1 rocket artillery regiment, 2 engineer brigades, 5 engineer regiments, 3 pontoon bridge regiments, 7 tactical aviation brigades, 4 army aviation brigades, 1 naval aviation brigade, 5 anti-aircraft missile brigades, 12 anti-aircraft missile regiments. And there are at least 143 independent light infantry, reconnaissance, special forces, volunteer, tank, territorial defense, and rifle battalions. These combat support forces number at least 600,000 troops. All the signals, radar, radio, technical, electronic warfare, drone logistics, maintenance of transport, medical, psyops, naval, rear area security, training, military police, staff, etc. units add at least an additional 500,000 troops to the current strength of the Ukrainian armed forces. Currently, 32 combat brigades are in the rear, training and waiting for the call to enter the fight in the next phase of the Ukrainian offensive. And Ukraine keeps forming new brigades. So please don't listen to people saying Ukraine is running out of units. Russia is running out of units. Ukraine isn't. And thanks to increased Western and Ukrainian artillery ammo production, Ukrainian artillery units are now regularly outshooting the Russian artillery. And indeed, and this is really interesting. And we must remember this, that they have got an awful lot in reserve, where we keep hearing reports, and I've been telling you that the Russians are using their reserves in the trenches on the front line. And once those breakthroughs are found and made, then you will get a pouring in of a lot of Ukrainian reserves. They just have a lot to throw at the counteroffensive that we haven't even, had hint of yet. And this does give you some hope in what the Ukrainians are doing, or a lot of hope, really. And that is, yeah, good stuff from Thomas Tyner to illustrate that there. I was going to say, yeah, also talking about the artillery, the Americans yesterday were saying that they can make what, 20,000 units a month now, or 24,000, should be up to 28,000 soon, which is, for the Ukrainians, that's like 1,000 a day just from the Americans. So when you talk about all the other artillery supply they're being given from all these other nations and making their own, there's Australian, there's then South Korean backfilling, there's the UK BAE systems, you got the Bulgarians, all of these other pieces coming in, then you are going to be finding that the Ukrainians are outshooting the Russians, or will be in certain areas. And more on that a little bit later in the military aid section. Right, on to the next bit. Seen in occupied Melitopol today, quote, "We are always with Russia, and Russia, it's love." Meanwhile, a few miles away in the capital of the same region, Russia fires cruise missiles into civilian residential buildings, killing pensioners. That's love, says Tim White. This is the kind of hybrid warfare, I guess, in a way. The propaganda that the Russians deliver to their occupied territories, whacking up massive billboards of, "Hey, happy families, Russia, it's love." Yeah, nothing says love like, I don't know, what is it that says love? Oh yeah, uh, yeah, that says love, doesn't it? Yeah, nothing says love like that. Right, moving on. This is a video that's going viral. 45 years old plus. We are all 45 plus years old, and we came to defend our motherland, but we have nothing to feed our family, no money to pay for utilities, and so on. A group of Russian mobilized complains about the lack of money they receive. Now, these videos are 10 a penny at the moment, but this is just another one that shows that Russia are in trouble. Again, this one speaks to the financial issues that Russia face. Not being able to pay their conscripted soldiers is a serious issue. And when they're trying to, bribe people from, I don't know, is it Kazakhstan, isn't it, to join the army? It shows that they can't mobilize their own uh, troops or their own population, and B, you've got to worry about those guys being paid. But I guess once they're in, and there's no deserting, there's no running away, even if you don't get paid, because you get shot. So, but it's a terrible situation the Russians are in. Right, Andrew Perpetua talks about the bridge at Henichesk. So this is one at the Arabat Spit that was blown up recently. He's saying that there's now a pontoon bridge on that stretch, as according to uh, satellite imagery that he has looked at. Well, also, no reports are saying the Russians have built a pontoon crossing between the current bridges near Chonhar. So this is between, I think, the old and new bridge at Chonhar. Um, this comes after recent missile strikes on the bridge by the Ukrainians. Local authorities claim the damage was not critical, but apparently is enough to create a temporary crossing. So these are such important crossings for the Ukrainians for the Russians, sorry, that they have built pontoon bridges already, and I would assume are using them. They're not going to be as effective as these bridges. They won't be able to get as heavy traffic across as they would like, and the number of vehicles that they can get across here will be far less than the number of vehicles they can get across the proper bridges. But still, it shows how important these logistic lines are, and you wonder how long those pontoon bridges will last. Anyway, thank you. That's the first video today. It is a really long one. I'll try and make the next one a lot shorter. I think there is a lot less stuff to discuss. Anyway, thanks so much. Take care. Speak soon.